Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us on the Bulldogs Behind the Scenes webinar featuring a tour of the Duluth Harbor with our friends from UMD's Recreational and Sports Outdoor program. So my name is Molly Nelson, and I am part of the UMD Alumni Relations team. Also on this webinar are my colleagues Matt Duffy and Austin Sommerfeld. Today's webinar is hosted by Zoom. Before I introduce our guest, I'd like to note that on the bottom of the screen, there is a place for you to ask questions titled Q&A. During the tour, feel free at any time to type your question in, and either Melody or Randy will try to answer as many of them at the end of the session. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our alumni website with a link to YouTube. Once the video is ready, we will send a link directly to you. Today we'll be guided on a virtual tour of the Duluth Harbor, which was filmed by Pat Colin. The tour is unique in that it was hosted via stand-up paddleboard and kayak with our hosts Randy Carlson and Melody David-McKnight. Melody is the SUP Kayaking Coordinator for the Rec Sports and Outdoor program, and she teaches outdoor skills, risk management, and intro to SUP kayaking in the Environmental Outdoor Education program. She has 13 years of experience as a kayaker. The most exotic place she has kayaked was the Florida Everglades, and the Apostle Islands remain her favorite destination. In her free time, she keeps an urban homestead and is an aspiring potter. Randy serves as the UMD Recreational Sports Outdoor Program, Whitewater Kayak, Canoe, Surfing, Stand-Up Paddleboarding, and Snow Kiting Coordinator, and has been teaching at UMD for 35 years. His educational background is in earth science and outdoor education from UMD, although teaching outdoor class has been his main career focus. Local whitewater rivers and Lake Superior are his primary habitat, and he will teach classes on nice days but prefers stormy days that offer more challenging exploration of the wind, waves, and the snow. It's now my pleasure to welcome Randy and Melody.
Thanks, Molly.
Thanks, Molly.
Welcome, everyone. Let's get packed up for our tour. We're going to take our essential rescue gear. So I'm loading up a bilge pump. There's a paddle float as well, taking a stirrup, a VHF radio, and I'm getting suited up in my dry suit. This is cold water gear. It's going to keep my non-cotton layers underneath totally dry with those wrist gaskets and neck gasket. You could also wear a wetsuit, and underneath that, you would wear a swimsuit. If it's really cold, you can wear thermal underwear, but the neoprene itself is what provides the insulation for a wetsuit. Randy's also suiting up in a dry suit, and we need to remember to take our big 5 that you can't paddle without: a boat, a paddle, personal flotation device, also called a PFD, a spray skirt, and of course your wet or your dry suit. So in this dry bag I'm about to load into my stern hatch, I've got a few extras. I'm taking my cell phone, so I've got backup communication in case of emergency. The VHF radio also does that. I have some extra warm layers. I've got car keys, and other things that you can take as well and should are water, sunscreen, navigational chart, compass, and these are items that you need just for a day trip. Helpful hint for putting on sunscreen: the sun is going to reflect off of the water also. So in addition to those obvious faces, face, neck, ears, you want to hit the underside of your chin and check the weather before you go. My favorite way is to actually call the weather. Lots of people get a kick out of this. You can call 218-729-6697 and you get NOAA weather radio. It's automated. You can get the regular weather. You can get the nearshore marine forecast for waters within 5 nautical miles of shore on western Lake Superior. And it'll also give you the forecast for 5 miles beyond shore. Really helpful tool. The VHF radio is another way that you can check the weather. And this tool also allows you to call for help if you need it. And let's listen to the forecast right here.
Patchy fog in the morning. Waves 2 feet or less. Thursday night, northeast wind 5 to 10 knots. Partly cloudy and evening wind becoming mostly cloudy.
So we are departing from UMD's boat shed. We never ended up encountering the fog they were talking about. This boat shed is on City of Duluth property, and so it's a public boat launch. You can come here and paddle from this beach. We have 2 other UMD facilities: the Whitewater Outpost in Carlton and the Surf Shack at the mouth of the Lester River. This website here allows you to check the water quality, which we've had some problems with in the harbor. Some years the E. coli level is too high. The past few summers it's been acceptable for human contact. It might be because the geese that are usually here have moved to another spot. There used to be wild rice in the harbor. In fact, the entire harbor was filled with wild rice. Once they started dredging the harbor to 23 to 28 feet deep for shipping, it's too deep for the rice to grow. So today we're headed towards Herding Island. So we're going to take a left turn from the boat shed, and we'll loop around Herding Island, and then we'll double back towards the lift bridge. As we're coming past the armory here, I'd just like to highlight some of the other programs that we offer. This harbor tour is a common one, and during the fall, UMD students can take a class for credit in sea kayaking, and we spend much of our time here. We also do eco tours further up the St. Louis River. You could paddle with us up the North Shore to Split Rock. We do multi-day trips in the Apostles, and we'll be doing them along the North Shore as well in the future. And we do instructor certification courses. If you are wanting to hone in on your strokes rescues, we do 1 to 2 day basic strokes and rescue courses. And Randy, what kind of programs do you do?
So we spend a lot of time paddling whitewater kayaks at the outpost, but our board sport programming has really expanded. So stand-up paddleboarding, surfing. And as you head south towards Herding Island, there's some small beaches that you could stop at, make adjustments to your equipment. But stand-up paddleboarders are going to have a leash and a life jacket. And then those provisions like water and first aid kit or whatever can go on the deck of a stand-up paddleboard if you have some bungees. The aspect of being able to swim to shore makes this tour a beginning level tour, and there's a lot to see as you head south towards Herding Island.
One of these things to see is a tern, which is perched right here on this navigational marker. There's actually a tern nesting area. You might have seen it as you've driven towards Wisconsin across the high bridge. It's called Interstate Island, and I'll talk about these navigational markers as well. They mark a channel, and when you're crossing over, headed behind Herding Island, motorboats and sailboats can come out and they can surprise you. They can come pretty fast. So it's important to be attentive and stay outside of those markers. If you have markers on both sides of you, then you're in the channel. There's lots to see on Herding Island, and this otter is one of the delights that we caught a glimpse of. Herding Island is a wildlife management area that's managed for nesting birds. So April through August, you can't get out at Herding Island. As you paddle along, you might see a goose sitting on a nest with one other standing guard. And if it cranes its neck out at you and hisses, you're a bit too close. So it's important to give them enough space where they feel secure. Beavers are another creature that you'll see here. This is a beaver food cache. It's different from a lodge, which is where beavers live. This food cache is more like a pantry. And beavers will eat 20 to 72 ounces of bark a day. Lots of nutrients are available to them in that cambium layer, and that's the layer that takes nutrients from the roots of the tree up to its branches and leaves. A beaver can take down a small tree in just a matter of minutes, but a larger tree like this one, it probably came and chewed and left and toppled this tree in several settings. If they stay there too long, they're vulnerable to predators. The biggest tree that a beaver ever felled was a 37-inch diameter cottonwood. Pretty phenomenal. And this one right here is an aspen. Right here, we're coming around, leaving the backside of Herding Island, and we're going to be seeing the harbor and headed around to the front side of Herding Island. When we filmed this, it was spring, and it's so much fun to see all of the fresh greenery coming up, grasses, sedges, irises, lilies. And before we talk more about the wildlife here, here's a really nice view of the high bridge. And I'm just going to have Randy go ahead and talk about what we're looking at here.
Yeah, so as you pass beneath the high bridge, there's Rice's Point, a public boat ramp. And then just a little bit past that is Interstate Island, an island that has more gulls and terns on it than I've ever seen in my life. It's amazing how many birds are on there. And further to the west is the Midwest Energy Slip. They load coal. And even further, the furthest bridge you can see is the Bong Bridge, and it is equipped with a sidewalk. So if you were wanting to ride your bicycle or walk from Wisconsin to Superior, or I'm sorry, Duluth, or Duluth to Wisconsin, you could do it on the Bong Bridge.
All right, as we continue around Herding Island, we're gonna see a couple of geese. In the springtime, you might see a bunch of warblers as well. The activity is really exciting. This year I saw a palm warbler for the first time. That was a new one on my bucket list. Some of the most common water birds that you'll see are mergansers, loons, cormorants. You might see goldeneyes, especially in the springtime. And of course, seagulls. We have two types of gulls that are especially common in Duluth, the herring gulls and the ring-billed gulls. The herring gulls are the bigger. They have pink feet, whereas the ring-billed gulls have yellow-greenish feet. And the ring-billed gulls also have that really distinctive black ring around their beak. So now we're going to take a look at the harbor. 900 ships visit the Duluth Harbor in a year, and we have salt, coal, iron ore, taconite docks. This one right here with the tall tower is a cement dock, and it serves about 20 ships a year. It's possible that this is still the tallest structure in the Duluth area at 284 feet. As we keep looking at the harbor, we have a dock for wind turbine parts you might be able to make out here. We also have docks for limestone and wood pulp. Right here in the background, that darker structure, so these are both grain elevators, but the one that's on the left that's a bit darker, that's the General Mills elevator, and it's the oldest elevator in Duluth. It was built in 1908. So now we're going to take you around the front side of Herding Island to show you some of the erosion that's happened due to the high water levels and some of the big wind events that we've had. As we pass this tree, we'll pause briefly to take a look at the greenery. That is a raspberry that was growing on the bottom of this tree. Especially in the fall, there's storms that will come in from the northeast, and they'll kick up 15 to 18-foot waves. And with those waves on the lakeside, Randy, how big do the waves get in the harbor?
Well, there can be a 3 or 4 foot wave crashing onto Herding Island because the swell pushes through the Duluth entry and bounces off the solid metal surface on the west side of the harbor and comes right back to Herding Island and can cause some pretty significant erosion, actually produce a surfable wave.
So we're saying goodbye to the geese. Now we're going to start the intermediate level of our tour. There's lots of traffic, sailboats, the Vista Fleet, iron ore ships. UMD RSOP has participated in conversations with the Minnesota Sea Grant, the U.S. Coast Guard, whose ship you see here, and the Duluth Superior Metropolitan Interstate Council. And they're working on new shore signage and a digital resource for paddlers. So look for that, paddlesafetwinports.com in the fall. And before we talk more about safety, I want to show you this additional beach where you can get out. You could stop here, but you can also drive here. It's a shorter walk from your car to the beach at this 8th Street beach than at the boat shed. And you can see the lift bridge in the background. That was built in 1904 and 1905. It was originally a ferry bridge, and so across the top there were there's two tracks, and they were attached to platforms. So you drive your car onto a platform, and then it would get ferried across. In 1929 and 1930, the lift span was introduced because it couldn't, with a ferry there was more traffic than could be handled. There's a really fun legend about how the canal was dug. And the legend goes that Superior, so the natural exit of the St. Louis River is in Superior, but Duluth wanted in on the shipping industry. And so Superior learned that Duluth was going to be digging a canal, and they asked for an injunction for Duluth to cease and desist. And as the legend goes, Duluth caught wind that this injunction was going to be delivered either by horse or by train, depending on who's telling the story. And so they called on citizens to dig, and they dug through the night, and at the last minute, the current washed the rest of the sand out. So that's the legend, but the true story is that the Ishpeming dug most of this. They started in the fall of 1870. The Ishpeming was a dredger, and they had to stop in the winter, and they resumed digging in the spring. By April of 1871, they were most of the way through, and they probably had to do a little bit of hand digging and use a bit of dynamite to get some frozen gravel out. There truly was an injunction, but it did not end up impacting construction of the canal, and it was delivered late. It was delivered after the canal was starting, after construction was started. So we're about to cross here. This lift span goes up about 40 times in the summer. It's important to look here and make sure you don't have traffic coming either way, and cross swiftly, just like that other channel. This one is much bigger and more serious. And some other things to be aware of as you are paddling in an area where there's ships is that you need to stay at least 100 yards away from freighters and industrial docks throughout the harbor. So now we're coming up on the Minnesota Slip Bridge, and we're going to go take a look at the William A. Irving. This one is docked, and so we can paddle right up next to it. And it never moves, which is also why we can't paddle next to it. But Randy's going to tell us all about the Irving.
Yeah, the William A. Irving, built in 1937, affords paddlers the opportunity to get right next to the propeller. It will never turn. And it's 611 feet long. So as you paddle along this freighter, you can see that there's steel panels riveted, an older construction. And the chain is absolutely huge. And as a paddler, to just compare the scale of your watercraft to the William A. Irving is very interesting. If you ever see the Irving out in the ship canal or passing under the lift bridge, you can be sure that ghosts are operating at captain and crew, and something is very strange happening in Duluth.
When you're paddling by the Irving, there are some other sailboats docked here, and it's important to stay out of their way. So we're going to be heading out towards the lake, and where we're going to be lucky and see a ship. And Randy, can you talk about how we made it out here?
Yeah, to get out here, it's not paranormal. We actually entered the Duluth Ship Canal and paddled swiftly out towards Lake Superior. And that's an advanced paddling experience in that there's a lot of waves bouncing around in the ship canal. Over 100 people are watching you. The lift bridge operator is sitting in their little house watching you. And so to be an ambassador for paddle sport, you have to accomplish this task properly. It is possible to portage on the south side of the ship canal if you didn't want to take this on. But now we are sitting safely out in Lake Superior on the north side of the ship canal.
And you just heard the bridge go off. We're about to hear the ship as well. Oh, there's the bridge. And there's the ship. This is a Paul Archer Girtha, and it's one of the biggest ones. It's 1,000 feet long. Actually, there aren't ships that are bigger than this, longer than this in the Duluth Harbor. And ships truly come from all over. They come from Greece and the Bahamas. There's one sitting in the harbor today that is from the Bahamas called the Juno. And there's a website right here that you can take a look at who's going to be coming through. There'll be somebody from the Marshall Islands coming through later on. Today, the most exotic one that's coming is the Michipicoten from Canada. And they bring materials from all over. I was on the docks when the call came through on the radio of a gecko The Blue Heron is another ship that you might see in the Duluth Harbor, and Randy has a personal connection with this vessel.
Yeah, my brother-in-law, Doug Ricketts, works for the Large Lakes Observatory and manages the Blue Heron. 40 years ago, there were not very many buoys out in Lake Superior taking data, but now with the Coast Guard and the University of Minnesota Blue Heron operation, we have all sorts of data about wind velocity, wave height, water temperature. A lot of research is done from the Blue Heron that's very helpful for scientists and surfers.
So you might be wondering how to tell if you're in the shipping channel. And this is marked with buoys. If you leave from the boat shed or from that 8th Street beach, you should not cross the line between the green buoys if you want to stay out of the shipping channel. And if you do want to enter into the shipping channel, as we did, make sure that you're crossing at the shortest point and spending the least amount of time possible inside of the channel. As a kayaker or a stand-up paddleboarder, you have many more options than the big ships about where you can travel, and it's entirely possible to stay out of the way of those ships. Interesting fact about these is that the odd numbers are on the green ones. The even numbers are on the red ones, so that if you're colorblind, you can still tell which side of the channel is marked by that buoy. As we paddle back, one last ship that we get to see is the U.S. Coast Guard vessel. If you are paddling in this area, give this vessel a nice wide berth so as not to make the Coast Guard nervous. And thanks for coming paddling with us.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Melody and Randy, for the tour of the harbor. It's certainly fun to see the Twin Ports from a different perspective. Now is the time for our question and answer portion of the session. We did ask questions in advance through our registration form. However, now is the time, if you would like to submit new questions, use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So our first question asks, this one's for Melody. In addition to the Duluth Bridge, are there other lift bridges that are still functioning today?
There is. There's actually lots of them, many in New York. So the Duluth aerial lift bridge is now a vertical lift bridge. And there are other vertical lift bridges in Vancouver, Washington. The interstate bridge goes between Vancouver, Washington, and Portland, Oregon. The Burlington-Bristol Bridge goes between Bristol Township in Pennsylvania and Burlington, New Jersey. There's a steel bridge in Portland, Oregon. That's the name of it. And the list goes on and on. It's pretty fun to look for them. The images are quite beautiful. The only one that was originally constructed as a ferry lift bridge, similarly to ours, was the Skyride in Chicago, and it was built for the World Fair, but that one is no longer standing.
So then another question related to the lift bridge, is it operated by a giant battery, or how does it function?
It is not operated by a giant battery. It has a Westinghouse, it has 4 Westinghouse induction motors, and so when that motor turns on, it generates its own electricity. And the bridge is counterweighted, both with those big heavy weights that you'll see go up and down when it's lifting, and the cables and chains play a role in that counterweighting as well.
Perfect. Now we've got a couple questions for Randy. The first question asks, are there submerged shipwrecks still in the harbor area?
There are pieces of submerged ships. There's 3 wrecks that I found interesting. In 1905, in late November, the Mataafa actually broached on the north pier of the Duluth Ship Canal, and of a crew of 24 people, 9 perished in 70-mile-an-hour wind. And theoretically, there's pieces of the Mataafa on the bottom of Lake Superior there, just off the Ship Canal. In 1927, the Thomas Wilson, a steel whaleback freighter, collided with the George Hadley steamship a mile outside the lift bridge. And there's a nice YouTube video of that diving on that wreck. the Thomas Wilson. And maybe even more classic, the USS Essex, ESSEX, was a wooden vessel, mainly operated under sail power, had smooth bore cannons, and traveled all around the world for the early days of the Navy, 1870 to 1885. And it ironically made its way back to the Duluth Harbor, and in 1931 was lit on fire on purpose to burn the wood away and salvage the metal, mostly copper. So it was sold for $400 to a metal salvage company. And remnants of that vessel are a third of the mile northwest of the harbor entrance. So kind of tucked in the northwest part of the harbor in 4 feet of water, a 50-foot section of its hull has been found, but not a lot to look at for shipwrecks in the harbor itself. The water's pretty dark as well, so it's difficult to see things underwater.
Perfect. Thanks, Randy. We actually got some live questions coming in that I think that Melody can answer. How cold is the water during the summer?
This is a really fun question. It's cold, and it's the core temperature of the lake during the summer, so down below the surface, usually doesn't get above 36 degrees, which is not much warmer than it is in the winter. But that surface water heats up, and I've measured it at 60 to 65 degrees. 65 is pretty high, but you might get that in some of the protected bays around the Apostle Islands. And you know, the water temperature can switch dramatically depending on what direction the wind is blowing. And you'll notice this on Park Point, that one day you go down there and the wind has been blowing towards the shore and it's really warm. Well, all of that surface water that's been heated by the sun is collected there. And you might go down the next day and the wind has switched and blown all of that warm water away, and some of that deep cold water circulates back up, and the water just hurts to be in.
What's kind of fun is seldom, does Lake Superior freeze in December, January. Sometimes in February, but we can surf on the lake when the air temperature is well below freezing. And so the water's splashing you, and since the air temperature is below freezing, you start to build up some ice. And the only way to get out of your wetsuit is to pour hot water on it. And so that's a source of pride for Lake Superior surfers, to be warm in our wetsuits, but get covered in ice.
We have another question here, more specifically asking about paddling away from the shore. So wondering, do you take an emergency personal locator beacon with you along the way?
UMD trips do not take emergency personal locator beacons, but we take a VHF radio, which enables us to contact vessels that are nearby, and that actually goes quite a distance. Mine is rated to communicate a radius of about 20 miles. And so you can get in touch with the Coast Guard if you need help. I always take a cell phone. UMD takes flares on each trip, and usually a mirror, which can reflect light back to signal to identify your location. You can also pack an ink to put into the water that will mark your location. These are all, of course, best during the daytime, except for the flares, which work a little bit better at night. And one of the most important pieces is, before you go, put together a float plan, where you're leaving from, where you're headed, what your bailout points are, when you're coming back and where you expect to arrive. And if you don't show up, what time should that person that you leave your float plan with call the authorities and say, hey, they didn't show up. I think we need to start looking.
One interesting thing about moving away from shore, if it's a offshore wind, stand-up paddleboarders are particularly vulnerable to wind. It slows your progress down. The sea kayak is a little more durable in the wind. because the person's sitting down. But you really want to be careful if there's offshore winds and not turn your Minnesota Duluth Harbor coastal tour into an offshore epic heading towards the Apostle Islands in Wisconsin.
That's good advice. Well, our next question here is for Randy. How can one rent a kayak tour in Lake Superior, and are they being offered?
Yeah, we do offer kayak tours for groups on the Duluth Harbor. In our current pandemic situation, it's been difficult to resume our normally scheduled programming. But in addition to the instructor accompanied tours that families could arrange now, you can access kayak and canoe and stand-up paddleboards equipment from our rental center. Now, on our Duluth Harbor tour, we showed areas around the William Irvin and the Ship Canal. That's not an area real suitable for an open canoe. It's better for sea kayaks and stand-up paddleboards. But there's a lot of people heading to the Boundary Waters, and so the canoes are awesome for that.
And I'll also say that we are just about done working on a COVID preparedness plan that we'll be submitting, which is what we need to do before we can resume programming. And so we've been looking carefully at how we can modify our delivery to keep participants and instructors as safe as possible during this pandemic.
Looks like we have a question coming from an alum wondering how many students take courses each year, and are they offered for credit? She was a student and is hoping that the winter outdoor recreation is still happening. So I'll let either one of you take that one on.
Well, my sea kayaking class has spaces for 10 people every year. And Randy, what's the capacity in your your whitewater kayaking classes?
So yeah, to use the smaller whitewater kayaks, it's 12 people in the pool. It's called Introduction to River Kayaking. And at this point in time, we're still trying to figure out how to best manage the swimming pool area. Group size, counting the lifeguard instructor in the pool for right now, is 10 people. So it's a small pool at UMD, but we use it an awful lot to train paddlers and surfers before we do our outdoor exploration.
And in typical years, in addition to those courses for credit, there's lots of opportunities for students to get out on the water, especially in the fall for sea kayaking. The whitewater and surf extends further into the year, into the winter. But multiple evenings throughout the fall and bright early mornings for sunrise and sunset tours on the sea kayak end of things.
Perfect. Well, I think that pretty much does our question and answer section. Once again, just thanks to Melody and Randy for taking the time to share with us the exclusive look at the Duluth Harbor on paddleboard and kayak. If you are in the area and are interested in paddling the harbor for yourself, feel free to check out the UMD Rental Center and future programs for information on gear rental and guided instruction. If you do have any other questions that weren't answered today, RSOP and our website are listed on this slide. Feel free to reach out and we'll try to get back to you with an answer. Also, please keep an eye out for our upcoming Alumni and Friends Alumni Learning Sessions. Our next program features UMD's Bagley Center with leadership from UMD. And then following that, we have some fun ones scheduled with COGS, which is the mountain biking organization here in Duluth, and the Twin Cities local Arboretum. So stay tuned for that. Again, a big thanks to Randy and Melody, and we hope that you will join us again for future alumni events. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Stay safe and healthy. See you on the water.